Here it is, the Gold Ore Mill, and it's the last standing one in the hills.
Welcome to Dakota Prospecting. I believe we got another good one here to show y'all. Now, this mine is the only mine on Black Hills National Forest land that still has a standing mill frame. And there are lots of really interesting things to take a look at here. Pretty exciting. It was started in the 1920s is when they did some exploratorial diggings, and then it started to operate around 1929, really kicking in. And it went all the way up until about 1940, and then in 43 or 42, I believe, they shut her down due to the War Act, like that other mine. So, Joe, do you want to tell them, or should I tell them? Well, I'll tell them. This is the Gold Mountain Mine just outside of Hill City, and it's been restored by the Forest Service in partnership with some other local community outreach groups, and we got to thank them for that. And there's some interpreted information around some of these artifacts. So, what do you say we just jump right into this thing, because there's a lot of stuff to cover here today, fellas, and let's have a look around. All right, so here's the boiler, and they use slate here to build it up, create a platform for it. Pretty impressive, no doubt about it. Okay, so that's the inside there. Yeah, that's something you don't see every day, that's for sure. So here's the back end of that boiler. Pipe coming out. Ain't that a cute little fella? Tell you what, they got some teeth though. Cute or not, he'll rip your finger right off if you get too damn close. Pretty cool. And that's the tubing. And we look inside there. It's really something. Now down here, there is a ruptured pipe. And although it looks like it's double sheathed, but the outer sheath is definitely ruptured. But of course this was for generating steam. Back in those days, steam power was pretty much the energy source of choice. And we'll walk down over here. And so here you have obviously the baffle for the firebox, and that's where they would regulate the heat. Now over here is the handle. Of course they would have a lever further down to do that. So right there it looks like a blow valve. I don't know what that chicken wire is around it. I don't know if that's original, but if it is, it sure held up pretty good over these years. It looks like there might have been some insulation around that, which would make sense. If you're trying to generate steam, you want to keep the heat, you know, upright. That's probably why they put this embankment around it, in order to give it some insulation value during the winter, because after all, it is just plain steel. So that definitely makes some sense. And you see the white material there on the bottom. That could be some kind of asbestos or other material in order to keep it insulated. Now there's a seam if there ever was one. Now if you look real close, you can see how this has been hammered. You know, they hammered these with a hammer, heated them up, and then pounded them in there, and those are the hammer marks you can see right through here. And over here is the X where they determined to put the fold, and this one comes right on that X, and then they heated these rivets up and pounded them in. A lot of work. So this material here, I believe, yeah, that's asbestos. Yummy. That's what that is. And that covered it to insulate the stack during the winter time. Here's the top of that stack. They have these massive chocks here, and this is a slip joint chock. If you look there, you can see where the bevel is, how it's dovetailed, and it is to keep the thing from rolling left or right, which would be another feature or use for this abutment that they have around it. Now underneath they've got these rolled steel bars. There's 3 of them, one here, I believe there's another one over there. I always find this kind of engineering interesting on how they made do with the equipment and technologies that they had available to them at the time. This is a good inch thick, this here, and this is like 1.25 inches back here. Yeah. So if we look at this boiler support, they didn't use any mortar. It was just mud and they stacked it. Not bad. Of course, when you dry stack, it's usually lasts longer if you've got a good foundation, because what happens is if it's standing without mortar, then there's no chance of the mortar deteriorating and having the rock come loose. So dry stacking is always much more durable. It also allows water to pass through. When you use mortar, what happens is you get this freezing and expansion and contraction, and because the water is locked up in there, and then it will bust, and you can't defeat the forces of nature. But they did a pretty sweet job here of stacking that, considering that this was just for an industrial application. I mean, this wall would be nice to have at your house, you know, in the backyard, or a retaining wall or whatever. Pretty cool. So now in 2007, like 71 years after the last load of gold ore was pulled out of this gold mine, the structure was starting to show its age due to time, weather, and vandalism. Because it was one of the last ore mills still standing in the Black Hills, and the only one still in existence on the Black Hills National Forest, and between 2008 and 2012, Forest Service employees and other volunteers from other organizations worked on annual projects to restore the mill try to get it in its original appearance as much as possible. So a big shout out to the Black Hills Historic Preservation Trust, the Mystic Ranger District, and the Passport and Time Volunteers, the Resource Advisory Committee of Pendleton County, and the local businesses and employees for their dedication and effort and generous contributions towards bringing this back for others to enjoy and share the heritage of the Black Hills. So the Forest Service went ahead and restored some of these piers, and they built them back up. You can see that one right there. It's kind of rotted, but they've shimmed her back up and put in concrete. And here we have the ore bin, and it's pretty big. It's bigger than that other one we saw at that 1893 mine.
And they've put galvanized metal there, part of the restoration, protect the wood that's underneath it from the weather. So the Forest Service has got them a sign there that says, "Enjoy but do not destroy your American heritage." I'll double down on that one. Hell yeah.
And then over here we have the feeder that would regulate the flow. They got a big old heavy steel door there at one point. The actual door is missing, but if you look, you could see where the hinge supports were.
Yeah, right there is the pulley wheel for the leather belt that would turn the mill and crush the ore, and prepping it for the ore bin, and then from there to the stamp mill. Now that spur gear, I'm not sure what that could have been for. Perhaps it was for the hoist for the mine. That's a strong possibility.
So right beside the mill frame we've got a mine shaft, and as she goes way down there. So that's the shaft down there, and it drops about 40 feet, and then it's a drift, looks like left and right from there. That has not been documented on how far back it goes. If you can look here on the side, you see that shale and how it's vertical. So, yeah, that's pretty cool.
Now, during the late 1920s, the Gold Mountain Mining Company, known as GMMC, began to determine the value of the quartz veins located here on this site, according to a 1929 geology report. Now, Gold Mountain continuously developed and expanded throughout the 1930s. Excavation of shallow prospecting trenches and pits tracked the quartz across the claim, and there's a bunch of them here, as you can see. One here, another here, another here, and they're kind of scattered throughout. But these prospecting trenches were to determine where the vein was headed, until finally they determined where it angled underground. And during the mid-1930s, a mill was constructed on this site, capable of milling 25 tons of gold ore per day. Now, the addition of this expensive mill, as you can see here, this is the mill frame, indicates that Gold Mountain owners believed there was indeed valuable ore beneath the ground, because it took a large capital investment in order to make that happen. But, you know, unfortunately, like a lot of these smaller mining operations, the company left little history behind outside of what we can see here on this site.
Now here's a pit right here that they dug, and over here is where they threw the overburden. So it looks like somebody was trying to high grade this pit here. Although it kind of looks promising, if there was gold there, Gold Mountain would have spotted it and they would have been taking that stuff out of there and having it assayed. And this is the foundation for probably what was one of the main buildings on the site due to its proximity to the mill and the boiler. So it could have housed any number of operations: assayer, mine foreman, and where the crew would muster in the morning and collect their pay. Well, fellas, here it is, the gold ore mill. And this is something you just don't see every day. In fact, this is the first one I've ever seen. And it's the last standing one in the hills. And it's a beauty. I'll tell you, that thing is just massive. Amazing, amazing how heavy duty that thing is. God only knows how much it weighs, but we're talking several tons for sure. Well, now check that out. That has got to be, I'll tell you, that is so cool. I mean, you can see where they grind the ore, and in fact there's a little piece of rock right there in the corner, how that works. So it drops down in here and that thing spins around, and you have, it was of course driven by steam. But you know what makes this unusual is they usually pulled these out. They didn't leave these behind because they were spendy. They weren't cheap. They could always sell this off to another mine. So pretty lucky to see it. It's my first one. I've never seen one of these before, at least not in person. These are cast. Looks like there's some kind of cement in between them to hold them in place. And they're segmented, and I'd imagine so that they could be replaced as necessary, which kind of makes sense. And then you got these ridges here, which of course have been worn down, and I can get my finger in between there. So that's about how wide they are. I'd say 3/4 inches between them. And that space down there that would allow the rock to go through, I'd say you're looking at about maybe 1.5 inches.
Okay, so that's the grizzly that grades the material as it comes into the first hopper out of the mine. And as it falls through there, it would normally drop down into a chute below it, which is obviously missing, and then find its way down into the main ore bin. Anything that doesn't pass through that grizzly would fall into the ore mill. From there, it would go to the bigger hopper down here and be fed out to the stamp mills. Now, the stamp mills were located down there. Because all this goes with gravity. That's how they build it. It makes it easier. That way you don't require belts and conveyors and things like that. It keeps the operation simple, requires less energy to process the ore. Well, fellas, that's going to do it for this adventure. I had a lot of fun out here, and I hope you enjoyed it and found it entertaining. This is certainly one of the nicest sites I've been to. And I just want to give a shout out to my new subscribers. Thanks for coming on board to the channel, and thank you again to my previous subscribers, because we're building up the channel that way and hoping to produce more of this type of video. So if you subscribe, you'll get a notice when that new video posts. Be one of the first ones to check it out. Weather's breaking, so I'm getting out a lot more, and there's a whole lot more to check out here. So stay tuned for the next one. Until then, thanks for tuning in to Dakota Prospecting, and hey, y'all stay safe. So right here we have a hopper, and if you look over there, you see the chute where that ore would come out. That's the inside. It's all covered up over the years, pine needles and such. And they left this here as a remaining artifact of this ore bin, and of course if you look over there you can see some moss growing on those timbers there, so that's original too. So if they hadn't come in here, this had all probably gone by now, because remember, they did that back in the 80s.